LSU has been quiet-ish in the transfer portal. Caroline Fenton, Locked On LSU, joining me here. Damonic Williams was a pretty notable target for LSU along the defensive line. He ends up going elsewhere in the SEC. Where does that leave the Tigers in their front four?
So kind of not a great situation right now for LSU. Of course, they lose Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith, are two starting defensive tackles to the NFL draft last year with no really clear solution there. So yeah, lose out on the top three defensive tackles that they've been targeting in the spring transfer portal period. And Brian Kelly didn't mince any words about it in his post-game press conference after the spring, if you want to call it a post-game press conference, because a game is, maybe
Post-game-ish. Why don't we call it post-game-ish?
Post-scrimmage press conference after the spring game, he said, look, we're looking for defensive tackles in the spring transfer portal window. That's now our number one and our sole focus. So just hearing that alone, that gives you kind of some context as to how dire of a need LSU has at that position. And I'm not saying has, that needs still very much so exists. So right now, LSU is targeting some other names, maybe not the top of the market defensive lineman. One that I'm looking at is JVR Suggs. He's a former defensive tackle out of Grand Valley State. Brian Kelly started his coaching career at Grand Valley State. His son was a linebacker at Grand Valley State. So it's not necessarily a guy that we bring out of the transfer portal, a guy from a college football program of that caliber to expect to be a starter, and not even just a starter, but a difference maker at LSU and in the SEC. But right now, that's where LSU finds themselves. The one guy that I think LSU fans can at least expect to see in that position is Jacobian Guillory. He's entering into his now fourth season at LSU, and he's gotten a little bit of experience here and there, but hasn't had a ton of experience just because he's been buried on the depth chart behind a Mason Smith, behind a Mekhi Wingo over the past couple of years. So now he's being given the keys to the car. The concern there is not a ton of experience. So the defensive line right now is probably one of my biggest concerns, if not my biggest concern surrounding this LSU team. They have bodies. They just don't have a lot of experience.
Yeah, and defensive linemen have been really highly coveted in this transfer portal cycle, whether that's Damonic Williams or Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. He went down to Miami. Derek Harmon went over to Oregon, also from Michigan State. There have been a lot of guys at that position group. And, William... Yeah, Philip Bleedy coming from Indiana goes to Auburn. And Damonic Williams specifically, I think, is the example as to why. I mean, I talked about him over the course of several episodes, over several weeks here on the show, because his recruitment was taking so long, because he had a lot of different offers. It was not, I got 1, 2, maybe 3 schools. No, you're hearing from 10, 12, 20 schools that say, hey, we'd be interested in, having you come on a visit over here. And so Blake Baker comes in as the defensive coordinator from Missouri, had a great year with the Tigers last year, goes to the different Tigers now, of course, with LSU. Does he have enough to work with to allow him to shine as a new coordinator on Brian Kelly's staff?
Right now, I say no. And I actually did a podcast yesterday about looking at some of the national championship odds. And honestly, to my surprise, LSU had the 6th best odds to win the national championship. And I said, that's not a bet that I would take, because I don't trust this defense, because I don't think that there is enough proven talent on this roster right now to take the defense from where it was last year, historically, statistically, the worst defense in LSU history, to all of a sudden being just an average unit. Because I'm really high on this LSU offense. I know I sound crazy that you lose Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, and Jaden Daniels and still feel good about the offense. I do feel good about the offense. I do think the offense is going to score a lot of points. Is it going to be as explosive as it was this past season? Probably not. But I think that in order for LSU to be serious national title contenders, this defense just needs to be average. I'll take great. I'll take elite, but it just needs to be average. I don't know if they can get to that, but I said it's unproven talent, because it's a lot of guys that haven't gotten a lot of starting experience, and a lot of guys that are coming in for their true freshman seasons or coming in as starters for the first time. But those guys might be the difference between this defense being, below average to average, or average to even good, or even great. A guy that I'm looking at closely is Dominic McKinley. He's a 5-star out of Lafayette, Louisiana, a local Louisiana kid, the number 1 recruit out of the state of Louisiana that's coming in. at the defensive tackle position. It's not fair of me to say, okay, this true freshman, he needs to be the solution to this horrendous defense. That's not fair of me. But that's where Blake Baker, who's making a lot of money, Bo Davis, former Texas defensive line coach who was hired at LSU this past offseason, Kevin Peoples, former Missouri defensive line coach who's coaching up the edge rushers. That's where they make their paycheck, is coaching up the young guys and getting all of these guys that are kind of a lot of question marks just because they're unproven and have a lack of experience, getting them to that ceiling. I also think another huge determining factor one way or another of how good this defense can be. It's not on the defensive line, but it's Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins, a linebacker in his freshman season, he looked like he was a problem. He was an absolute problem. In year 2, he didn't have that same impact. You didn't feel him in games as much as you did in his true freshman season. And a lot of that has to do with coaching. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he was just out of his natural position. If Blake Baker, who has a history of coaching up linebackers, period, but also at LSU, if he can coach up Harold Perkins and make that transition to the inside a little bit more seamless and give Harold Perkins kind of the tools that he needs to succeed at that position, then I think that we could be talking about a different LSU defense. But that's a big if.
That is indeed a sizable if. But one thing that's not is whether LSU is or would be a favorite over Alabama right now. So I saw this line the other day, and it was one of several I talked about on yesterday's show that really stood out to me because I saw LSU minus 2.5. Granted, they're at home in Baton Rouge in the cozy confines of the home crowd down there.
Cozy subjective. Not cozy for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That is exceptionally true. Minus 2.5 against Alabama. Does that feel right to you? Is that how confident you feel about LSU post-spring? And certainly Alabama has undergone their fair share of turnover, but the Crimson Tide have a new coach, but the same quarterback. LSU's got the same coach, but they're going to be working in a different quarterback. Would you favor at Caroline Fenton Sportsbook, which I'm sure will be widely available very, very soon, would you favor LSU over Alabama?
It feels right now. Now, I reserve the right to change my mind once we get through a couple of games at the regular season, once we see LSU take on USC on Labor Day weekend in the first week of the season. But right now, it feels right. And frankly, I don't know if it's because that's more about LSU or because that's more about Alabama. Obviously, where that game is going to be played, like that can be the toss-up. That can be the difference. That LSU beat Alabama 2 years ago at home. You go on the road at Bryant-Denny. Alabama wins that game. If you play that game at Tiger Stadium, does it turn out differently? If you play that game in 2022 at Bryant-Denny, is the result different? I mean, that's the kind of factor that both of these stadiums and both of these fields are. But also, I don't know what to expect from this Alabama team. And Alabama is no longer getting the Nick Saban benefit of the doubt. That if you look at two teams on paper that seem really evenly matched, well, I'll say I'll take Alabama because Nick Saban is their coach. They don't have that anymore. And that's no disrespect to Kalen DeBoer. But those are pretty big shoes to fill, that he doesn't get that same benefit of the doubt as the greatest coach to ever coach the game of college football. There are a lot of changes. That's change of an offense. You're shaking up the offensive line. Alabama just lost the right tackle, J.C. Latham, to the NFL draft. You lose Isaiah Bond to the transfer portal. You lose Caleb Downs to the transfer portal. Those are really important players. So while you have that consistency, and I'll give Alabama that advantage, they have the consistency at quarterback, and it's a pretty damn good quarterback at that in Jalen Milroe. I think that with, the game being at LSU and the change at quarterback at LSU being Garrett Nussmeier, a guy that's going into his 4th season and has a decent bit of experience at this level and understands the offense because he's been learning it the last 2 seasons, I think that feels right now. Things can change.
I'll just speak from personal experience and tell you that Kalen DeBoer will have you feeling many of those same things that Nick Saban did for many, many years. I have seen it too many times. Fool me once, but not thrice. Absolutely, positively not. Can't let that happen.
He's a great coach. I think it was a great hire by Alabama.
I think it is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Caroline Fenton, Locked On LSU. Check her out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much as always.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.